The Returns. The official term for the returns is the Nostoi, and this is from the Greek term meaning the people returning, literally. Now, in the Iliad and in the stories about the war itself, we actually see the episodes of combat, and there's a certain amount of glory that goes along with that, as well as discussions of loss and inhumanity and horror and destruction. There's all that. But in the Returns, we see the results of all this, because it's not just the glory. There's also this idea that after the war, now life continues, which is why the end of the Iliad is so interesting, because it does end with the continuation of life itself in the celebration of the funeral games. Well, in the Returns, we see the aftermath. During the war, so many soldiers think of what they're going to do when they return home, and what they find is that things have changed. It's never really going to be the same place, and you're certainly not the same person. So we have in the Returns then a great discussion of both the glory and the horror of war and the aftermath. What comes beyond once the war is over? What does the soldier do? And our stories begin with the Greek behavior with the fall of Troy. Typical fall of a city, they destroy everything. Unfortunately, this means that they destroy the temples also, and this makes the gods very unhappy. So although the Greeks have had the favor of the gods for much of the war, and certainly at the end, now they've lost the favor. And now the gods themselves are going to take vengeance upon the victors. Nestor is the only one who seems to make it home safe and sound, and just continue to enjoy the life that he had lived before. He's unique, and he's also one beloved of the gods and renowned in his wisdom. Agamemnon, well, we already saw what happened to him. He goes home as a conquering king and the brave hero, expecting lauds and accolades, and then instead he finds an unfaithful wife who is plotting his destruction. Menelaus is interesting because there are a couple of different stories. Most of them, though, involve him getting into an argument with Agamemnon about how best to go home. The brothers split up. Menelaus then finds himself shipwrecked, finds himself down in Egypt, where in some of the stories he finds Helen. Possibly there's some sort of a happily ever after ending, maybe, kind of, or at least he makes it home with Helen and they can rebuild their life together. Although, as I've said before, and as you would see if you read the Odyssey, there's a great deal of tension between them. I don't think he ever really trusts her again. And we see this when Telemachus visits, and they have to have dinner together, and he sits down with them, and you can just see the tension between them. He took her back, and he doesn't regret it, but there's just a lot of passive-aggressive, very uncomfortable dinner conversation that you would expect if you have a husband and wife who really, really don't like each other all that much. Euripides found the story of Menelaus and Helen so compelling that he actually wrote a play about it that you read for this class. It was first performed in 412 BC, and like so many of Euripides' plays, they reflect a lot of Athenian thinking during the Peloponnesian War, especially in the wake of the Sicilian expedition, which was a major undertaking by the Athenians to conquer the island of Sicily that ended in a complete disaster. And so you have this idea then of really just the great destruction brought upon the armed men who had to go to a faraway land and now probably will never make it home again. Only a few actually did make it back from that invasion. So there's all these things going on in Euripides' mind, as always. Basic plot is, after the fall of Troy, Menelaus finds himself shipwrecked on the return trip, finds himself down in Egypt, where he sees Helen, much to his surprise, because, well, he thought he had gotten Helen back from Troy. Turns out, though, that she was just a phantom, someone created by the gods to bring about all these other things, to bring about all these events in the fall of Troy, but to allow Helen to remain chaste. And Helen had remained chaste. However, the king of Egypt now wants to marry her. And so the story is about them plotting to find an escape, to make it away, because if the king of Egypt finds out who he is, then he'll kill Menelaus and keep Helen for his wife. So they plot, they devise, and then they escape. And so there is kind of a happily ever after for them in this sense, in this regard. And some of the stories actually say that they do just live together and remain in their love, because she was chaste and he was appreciative. and so they could rejoin under these terms. But that's not the most common story. Most commonly, she was actually at Troy the entire time, and he went and got her back and took her home. Then there's Diomedes. Now, Diomedes, you might recall, had actually engaged the gods in combat. He had beaten Ares in combat during the Trojan War, and he actually very unwisely fought Aphrodite as well. True, he was goaded on by Athena, but that was no excuse for Aphrodite. Now, Ares will sulk and get mad, and he'll fight, and you might have to deal with him on another battlefield. But Aphrodite isn't a warrior, and she was just there for fun, and so when he cut her, she took it very, very personally, and she was not going to face him again on the battlefield. Instead, she visited his wife. And so when he returns home, the conquering hero, he finds that his wife, according to one story, had a single lover, but in others had every lover she could find. So any man who wandered by could be invited in for a nice time. And she had plans for him also. The idea was that they were going to kill him, do away with him, and she and her lovers or her lover were going to keep the kingdom. Well, he figured that out, and he left. So he just left her to the kingdom, left everything behind, and he went to Italy, and he went to Apulia. And there he tried to live peaceably. Later, when Aeneas is engaged in combat with the Italians come and ask for his help because he's fought against Aeneas before. And Diomedes tells them, "I'm through with war. I spent years fighting against Aeneas and fighting against the Trojans, and all it got me was misery, destruction, and this horrible life. And I want no more of it. Good luck to you, but I advise you to make your peace, because there's no way you can come away from this unscarred." So Diomedes, then, is one who learns from his past experiences. And like many of these people who are returning home from the war, all they want now is the fruits of peace. Neoptolemus, the son of Achilles, learned from a prophecy that he should avoid the sea. So instead of sailing back with everyone, he decided to march his army. And so they went through Epirus, and remember that he took Andromache as his concubine. And according to the story, then, these are the ancestors of Alexander the Great. So Alexander the Great comes from this line. Now, later on, he takes Hermione as his wife. That's the daughter of Helen. And when he dies, this is what's really interesting. Andromache, then, is left, and she marries Helenus, who is another survivor from Troy. And so now you have Trojan family reunited in rulership in a different land. And they establish what amounts to a second Troy, and so it becomes just another Troy. Aeneas visits there in his wanderings, and he sees sort of Troy reestablished. So that's kind of interesting, where Andromache at least gets some peace in the later life after all the horrors that she experienced. Of course, the greatest tale of returner from the Trojan War is the story of Odysseus. But this lecture ends here, so we'll be covering Odysseus in the next lecture.